I remember walking with Alan Moore up Park Circus when he was doing V for Vendetta, and he was telling me the story of V for Vendetta.
Really? Yeah.
And how this guy gets stabbed through a letterbox, and he pointed to one of the letterboxes on the street.
Yeah.
And he says, it's something like that. And the villain's from Glasgow. And I went, all right, Alan, okay.
Hey folks, Mark here with this month's comics from Millar World and Dark Horse. We've got Nemesis issue 4, Prodigy issue 4, Jupiter's Legacy Finale issue 2. Collect them all.
Hi there, John. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I see you're in relaxing clothes.
Do you know, the end of the day, I always have a wee sauna or a shower or something like that. And I told you I was on Zoom calls all afternoon. So
Yes.
it was a shower today, you know. So I want to look the best for you.
Absolutely, me too. I'll keep my glasses on because that way I can actually read the print.
It makes you look very sophisticated. I like it.
Yes, it hides the dullness behind my eyes. Yeah. It was nice to see you the other day in Glasgow.
It was really nice. It was good because it was a bit of a flying visit for me, and I thought there's no way I'm visiting Glasgow without seeing you, you know, because I think, you know what's really weird? Like, I'd literally got off the plane and then I went to our place in Glasgow and I checked my emails and there was a message from you saying, I hear you're in Glasgow. I mean, it was within about 40 minutes of the plane touching down.
You see, it's a small city. You don't get away with anything.
Who was it that saw me? Was it Chris from Comic City Centre?
Yeah, it was Chris from City Centre Comics, yeah.
So how did he see
is,
me? He never said hello to me. Did he see me in the street?
I don't know. I didn't ask. But he's bought a notebook to see which of us today drops the most names. So
It's going to be you.
Forget about Trump and Harris.
Spoiler alert, is going to be you. You'll drop the most names. But no, it's good to see you anyway, you know. And it's funny because just as a wee intro for people, I always describe you. People will say to me, you know, in the States, whatever, they know your name but maybe haven't met you and everything, you know, because you're so connected. And I always say, if a Terminator had to go back in time and take out one person as a child and destroy the British comic book industry, you'd be the person the Terminator would go for, because you're kind of the glue that holds it all together and has done for like 4 or 5 decades, you know.
That's very kind of you. It's difficult for me to see me, but if you say so, I'll take it for granted.
I'm sure we should have told me that. You know.
Well, I sent you a tenner to say it, so that's okay.
Because we met, I mean, I was 13 when you opened your shop. And, you know, for anyone listening in America, you know, it's like Scotland pretty much didn't have comic shops, you know, when they had the Phil Sooling kind of revolution at the end of the 70s and everything, you know. We were buying everything from local grocery stores. And then my English teacher, Kevin O'Brien, saw me reading a comic. And he says, you know, a pal of mine I was at school with has opened up a comic shop. He was a teacher at St Aloysius in Glasgow, and he's given it all up to become a comic book retailer. And so it began. I think that was would that be like August, September 1983? Thereabouts?
It was 84.
84, right. So I was 14.
We started on the 1st of March, 1984.
Right. So you were doing the comic march before that then, yeah?
Yes, we did the march first. Well, we all met in Wintersgill's pub in Great Western Road.
Which is still there, a famous pub in Great Western Road.
It's still there. It still looks the same. Art Deco, beautiful pub.
Great.
But by the time you joined us, we'd moved to Blackfriars in the Merchant City.
Right.
But up in Wintersgills, we decided to put money together to go to the Westminster comic marts in London.
Yeah.
And then we thought, why are we doing that when we can just invite everybody up to Glasgow?
Which was unheard of then, you know. I mean, unheard of, wasn't it?
Well, it was unprecedented, the number of people we had. I mean, I think on one day we had Dave Gibbons, Kevin O'Neill, Mick McMahon, Robin Smith, not John Wagner at that time, he came a year later. But I mean, all in a row. It's unbelievable, really.
Because I went, what was the very first one you did? The comic march?
Oh, now you're asking a question. We actually used to hire St Aloysius College Hall.
All right.
and it was, I mean, there was a queue outside, and there was thousands of pounds changing hands. But we had to humph all the tables down from St Al's and then humph them all back at night. So it was a bit of a hassle. But McClellan Galleries was terrific. That was a really good venue. And then we decided to open a shop, you know, the way you do, because you know everything about retail. We knew nothing about retail. And so we opened... what it was Steve Montgomery came into Wintersgills and said, I've discovered these shops at very reasonable rents in Virginia Street, in Virginia Galleries, the old tobacco market. So I went down for a nosy and I thought, oh yeah, that's pretty good. So the two people who were most interested along with me were Bob Napier and Pete Root. And for some reason, we formed a company. Pete resigned from British Rail, I resigned from St Aloysius, and suddenly we had a comic shop. And within a year, we'd gone from a small unit to a larger unit to a pretty huge unit with 2 rooms.
Yeah.
So, pretty good.
I remember that wee unit. I'd memory hold that, but I remember the first time I came in, I think was the Saturday you opened. Kevin had told me to come through. And I remember it was essentially just a row of shelves, wasn't it? With a wee table at the top. It was tiny.
Yeah.
A bric-a-brac place.
We had to get new shelves built. My relative... Andy Gillespie, who was in Simple Minds, not at the time, him and his pal, another Andy, built these bespoke shelves for us, and the place started looking much better.
I know Andy, actually. We've got a mutual pal, Liam Nugent, who also...
Oh, yeah, Liam. Yeah.
So Andy's claim to fame is he built the shelves in ACA, even though he's a pop star as well. You know? Yeah,
but the Simple Minds isn't as important as building my shelves.
Do you always remember that first retail unit that you had? I remember this is so exciting. You know, a shop that just sells comics. Like, it's unthinkable now that would be rare, but it was such an exciting thing, wasn't it, to see that in Glasgow? But I remember there was a wee teddy bear shop across from you. Do you remember that? The lady who has speciality bears. And I remember just overhearing a conversation between two of the women in the shop. And you know that every nerd pursuit like us, you know, we'll be talking about our top 7 Jack Kirby inkers, you know, which must sound crazy to the people in the teddy bear shop, you know. But I remember hearing them chatting, and they were talking about the bears as if they were children. And they said, would you like to bring your young man down on Sunday? We're having a teddy bears picnic if you'd like to have him dressed up. It's a formal occasion.
They never invited me.
That was so... But that's what I loved about the Virginia Galleries, because there was a wee retail outlet, you know, every 15 feet and everything.
Yeah, there was a record shop, a bookshop, yeah.
And that also helped your customers as well. Like the Rap Records people probably bought your...
Rap Records, that's right. It's quite funny because this woman opened in our old unit, the small unit, and Pete Root was doing his usual back issue thing, you know, where he wouldn't look up and he was putting comics in bags and pricing them and things like that. And I was sitting at the desk, and the woman came in and she said, hello, I'm just opening a clairvoyant place. Do you think I'll be a success? And Pete, without a beat, said, you ought to know. And she never came back.
Pete Root was like an absolute legend, you know. I mean, I'm sure anybody listening to this from the Glasgow comic scene will remember Pete really well, you know. But my favourite thing with him is, remember Stephen McGinty?
Yeah.
Like Stephen was a customer, and Stephen must have been about 15 or something at the time. He's about the same age as me. And Stephen came in and he had a big pile of comics, and he asked Pete to sell them, you know. And Pete just turned around to him and says, no way. And Pete's like the retailer, he's like the guy running the shop. And Stephen says, why not? And it was like 30 quid's worth of comics or something. He went, you're a young, good-looking guy. Spend this money on taking a girl out on a date. Leave the books here. And
that's what he said.
The weirdest thing in his life.
Yeah, he was at the desk instead of me. I must have been doing something. But I heard this exchange. He's absolutely correct. Yep.
But every comic store kind of has, like a bit like Star Trek or whatever, or the X-Men, you know, there's this template of personalities, isn't there? You know, there's in the X-Men, there's the Rebel, which is Wolverine. There's the kind of Boy Scout, which is Cyclops and everything. You know, it's the same in the comic stores. And I think Pete was the kind of grumpy Wolverine character, wasn't he? And I think you were the consummate salesman. You were the enthusiast. You know, the guy perfect for out front. You know.
Yeah. And Bob Napier was a silent partner. But Bob held the thing together. It's a bit like the Beatles with George Harrison. He held the thing together. And so the three of us worked better than any one of us would have worked.
Yeah. It's actually a really nice mix of personalities, isn't it?
Yeah. And of course, Bobby and I ended up in Captain Britain. I was a gangster, McShane, and Bobby was my helper because he was a lot taller and bigger and scarier than me. But we got defeated by some X-Men villains or something within one page. So we've only got one page, but it keeps being reprinted. So,
well, do you know what?
Anytime I'm in a shop, I open up the big hardback and show people, oh, that's me and Bobby.
See, about 2 or 3 years ago, I don't know if I ever told you this, I tried to buy you the original page as a gift.
Someone told me you did, yeah.
And I just got outbid. I can't remember where it was. It was like Comic Art Fans or something. And I remember it was getting crazy though, because I thought Captain Britain's relatively niche to American readers, so I thought it probably wouldn't be too crazy. And it started off at about $500 or something like that. And then I think I eventually went about 10 grand or something stupid,
It went to a ridiculous price.
And somebody came in with like 23 grand or something at the last minute and just completely blew me away, But Alan Davis pages are very sought after, though, aren't they? And maybe because you were in it. Maybe that
I think that helped Alan's career, yeah. Where would he have been without me?
That scene, though, was so obviously important to all of us, because if you think of who came out of the Glasgow scene, there was myself, Grant Morrison, Frank Whiteley, Gary Erskine, Dom Regan, millions of guys. I mean, disproportionately. And we all say, whenever we all talk privately, we all say ACCA was the thing that kind of made us all really, because otherwise you're just a guy in his bedroom thinking about getting into comics, didn't you? But I think you made it quite a tangible reality that you saw a business based around comics, and you actually brought these guys up to the store, like you said.
Well, I remember Alex Ronald came in with his own photocopied wee comic, Red Sands or something. Mm-hmm. And he showed it to Pete. Pete goes, oh, I think I'll send this to Alan Grant. Then the next thing Alex is doing 2000 AD.
That's amazing.
It's all about connections.
But you're a great connector. You're good at... Because I remember... I mean, I was just like a wee guy. I was like maybe 15, 16 by this point. And I remember you would say... I'd be hanging around the shop on a Saturday just kind of chatting. And it was always great. I mean, this is why comic shops are better than Amazon, isn't it? The guys will recommend a Steve Englehart run on Batman that you missed because you were 8 when it came out. You never read it, so you'll pick up those Steve Englehart issues and everything, So I was always hanging around the shop looking for, wisdom. And I remember you said one
wisdom.
and you said like Mick McMahon and Kev O'Neill are coming up. Do you want to come out for a pizza with us? And there was maybe 10 of us all went out for a pizza. And I remember I didn't have the money, and you paid my pizza for me and everything.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was great. Like there was loads of and everybody's got a wee story like that. There was always 3 professionals up, but 10 Glasgow hangers on like me. Would come along and try and eavesdrop on the adults talking.
But I think mixing with professionals is the way to become a professional.
Yeah.
If it was just a bunch of fans, you wouldn't get that mix.
Yeah.
I mean, Kevin and Neil, look at the work Kevin did, and Mick McMahon on Slain, just amazing.
And meeting these guys, that's what I always say this to people, but the minute you realise something's possible as a job and somebody who's flesh and blood did it, you think, I could actually give that a try. It's quite inspirational, isn't it?
Yeah, it's real. Yeah. Someone actually produced that page. It didn't just come out the printer. And I remember when we'd, there was these 2 unknowns, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. That's right, that's who they were. And one of the other shop guys came out and said, have you seen the queue to get into your shop? And I went, no, I've been in the shop all day. He says, come with me. And he led me out onto Virginia Street. We went up Virginia Street, onto Ingram Street, along Ingram Street towards like George Square. I'm going, oh dear, this is quite big, isn't it? And I think, is that the day you met Dave Gibbons?
It is. That was the time I met. And I never met him again until I was a professional, like 10 plus years later. I was still at school, so I was about 17. And I actually gave him a letter, which we printed in the back of the Kingsman books, because I had a copy at home as well. And I gave him a letter to say, like, I think it's great that you've done Watchmen, and I hear you're about to start working with Frank Miller, but I feel the next good move for you is working with me. and I wasn't even kidding. I was totally serious, like a psychopath, you know.
But obviously that was true because you got Kingsman.
Well, it worked out in the end. It took 30 years, but like...
Yeah. All things come to them who wait.
That's true. It's the Stalker's Manifesto, you know.
But, you were at Blackfriars, weren't you, at the meeting when we started Trident, weren't you?
I'm not sure if I was at that.
At the actual meeting, no.
I don't think I was at the meeting. It was Martin Skidmore and those guys up.
That's correct, yep.
Yeah, I don't think I was there because I remember coming, you had an office separate from the shop at that point, and I remember talking to you there about it, but I didn't know there was a kind of an actual first meeting where everybody got together.
It was Jeff Fry who owned the job. I always thought Jeff Fry was a name like Stan Lee. He put his first name too.
It's like a soft English version.
And he said, get whoever's available. And I just kind of grabbed guys that were around the shop, and we all went to this meeting in the basement. I think Dom Reagan was there. Yeah. And Trident, I mean, look at the folk that are in Trident. It's terrific. I know it was early work and everything, but it was looking back on it, the names that are there are just amazing for what amounted to a kind of professional fanzine. But all those people went on to something really big.
It's kind of crazy. I've got this poster that they did in 1989 or something for the very first thing I ever did, The Saviour. And half the names on it became internationally best-selling writers. Yep. And this is like a company run out of a bedroom in Leicester, practically, wasn't it, to start with? You know, I mean, it was
just a corner of his bedroom, yeah.
and there was like Neil Gaiman, Grant Morrison, myself, like, I mean, tons of people. And it didn't last long. It probably just lasted, about a year and a half or something?
Well, I think his real ambition was to start a rival to 2000 AD.
Right. Which
he did with Toxic.
Yes.
But we had a big meeting in Pat Mills' house. Mm-hmm. And I said, I was under the impression from Jeff that he wanted to do Metalulo, a monthly magazine.
Yeah.
And I thought that'd be great. Imagine having a nice glossy magazine over in Britain. Mm-hmm. But Pat Mills was under the impression, probably also from Jeff, they wanted to start a weekly comic.
Wow.
So when Jeff brought out this spreadsheet about the amount of money we were going to make out the weekly, mm-hmm. I said, but we haven't got an inventory. I said, if DC Thompson, one of their artists, goes really sick for 2 months, it doesn't matter because they've got stuff in a drawer that they can just slot into the comic. They've got... I saw 4 unpublished graphic novels in DC Thompson's headquarters one time. Mm-hmm. They've got tons of material. Yeah. I said, you don't have any material. If somebody's sick, what do you do? What do you put in its place? Blank pages? Anyway, Pat Mills and Kevin O'Neill took up the challenge and I think did a pretty good job under the circumstances. There's some terrific material in Toxic. Yeah. And it lasted 35 issues, which is not brilliant, but I think it was over-ambitious.
Well, you don't really think about the cost of producing a comic because so many people say to me, oh yeah, I'm thinking of putting a comic together. And I was like, well, I hope you've got a spare couple of $100,000, just in the background, before you start publishing, like...
Exactly.
Our Millar World books, we do 3 or 4 titles a month at the moment, but you need to be 6+ months ahead. You have to have this stuff in the drawer to make sure nothing goes wrong. And that means $600,000 or $700,000, it has to be sort of always there in a kind of slush fund, if you're paying people properly, But a weekly comic, and that's a monthly, a weekly comic that's 1.5 times the size of an American comic. It was 36 pages or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking in the millions in the slush fund there, aren't you?
Yeah. I think it 1 million, and it wasn't enough.
Yeah, yeah. And that's he's also paying staff and premises and all that kind of thing as well. But I think that their heart was there, wasn't it? And I think it was probably a good time in terms of, like it was a really exciting period in comics, wasn't it? Like you'd Watchmen, Dark Knight, Elektra Assassin. 2000 AD was firing on all cylinders. It just seemed a great time to keep launching comics, didn't it?
Toxic kind of encouraged 2000 AD to publish in colour. Mm-hmm. But when I was talking to Richard Burton, not the actor in case anybody doesn't know comics, when I was talking to Richard Burton at 2000 AD, I said, But some people are better in black and white.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, Mick McMahon could do either. Kevin O'Neill also, they did a coloured version of Nemesis for America and it looked great. But some people are just better in black and white. And then I saw that a wee while later, they went, yeah, not everything has to be in colour. And I think that's a good idea.
Well, it saves you $150 a page if it's in black and white.
Well, that's one way of looking at it, yeah.
But it's funny, in Britain, though, it's weird. We were always quite relaxed about black and white, weren't we? Where Americans were horrified at black and white.
Well, yeah. When I took Bogeyman to Angoulême in France, I sold it to the Norwegians because they like black and white comics. But the French wanted a big full colour album. So I'd got Robin Smith to, he's a great colourist, by the way. He worked with Frank Miller,
Really?
Martha Washington. I got him to do a few pages in colour, the overlay, black overlay and then the colour underneath. But the French didn't take the bait. And eventually it ended up at DC Comics, who did sell it in several different languages in a small format. But at least it got all over the world. So, what the heck?
But it's interesting, because it's only in hindsight I realise how revolutionary that was, because you were doing, you're a comics retailer, some years' experience by this point. You're obviously very well connected and everything. And then you brought in John Wagner, Alan Grant, Robin Smith to do...
I like starting small. Yeah.
And it gets a television adaptation at a time when you couldn't get a Batman movie off the ground practically. It's only now I'm thinking about it, that's kind of weird, isn't it? Because now we're so used to everything gets adapted, but back then you basically had 4 Superman movies, a couple of Batman films, and the Batman movies were starting to struggle and nothing else was happening, no Marvel movies or anything. How did that happen? How did you get that?
Well, what happened was Angoulême, because I had a Bogeyman table.
Right.
And it was the British year, so a lot of us were over there.
Oh, that's the year every single person in the British industry went, except me. Everybody else went there. Yeah.
Apart from you, yeah. Everybody else.
And
nobody introduced me to this guy who was at my table, but he seemed quite nice and interesting.
Yeah.
I later found out it was George Perry, who wrote the Penguin Book of Comics, the most important single-volume introduction to comics in Britain ever. But nobody told me that. But I got talking to him, and he picked up the Bogeyman. Next thing I know, it's I can't remember what day it was, so it was either the Guardian or the Observer.
Yeah.
And that issue and they published about a half page on the Bogeyman, a big picture. And Alan Yentob was reading it and phoned up BBC Scotland and said, do we own the rights? And of course, I bet nobody he was talking to had a clue what he was talking about. But they very quickly got a hold of my phone number, negotiated the rights, assigned a producer, Andy Park, who created Max Headroom, Charlie Gormley, the director, and Paul Pender, a new writer at the BBC.
Hang on, is that Tommy Gormley?
Sorry?
Is it Tommy Gormley directing?
No,
not Tommy who worked on. Not the guy who worked on Star Wars and all that, because he lived in Partick.
I think he was related. They were related. Yeah, and suddenly we'd Robbie Coltrane, Fiona Fullerton, Craig Ferguson. We had Midge Ure because Andy Park taught him at whatever secondary school Andy taught at.
That's amazing.
And then it all came together. Very small budget. Us filming in a terrible torrential rain in Glasgow. It was unbelievable. Yeah. I stayed in the torrential rain during one of the scenes for about 4 or 5 hours, and I couldn't take it anymore. I was trempé jusqu'aux os, as the French say, soaked to the bone. And Robbie Coltrane, an absolute trooper, no bother at all, blah, blah, blah. And so, first of all, he's acting a loony wandering about Glasgow. And next he got Cracker acting the psychiatrist, investigating the loonies. So there you go.
That's it. Was it just one season or was it a one-off?
Just one-off, yeah.
Because
there's a poor version of it on YouTube.
Right, cool. And do you guys still own the rights? Is it still with you guys?
It's still, in order to facilitate the DC deal, I reassigned the rights to John and Alan and Robin.
Right.
Because otherwise there's just too many people involved.
Right.
But it was me and George Jackson originally who did the contract with Archie Goodwin's help. I'm trying to get a lot of name drops in here so I can beat you.
You've won it already.
And Denny O'Neill was one of the signatories to the contract. How many name drops was that? But I reassigned the rights because otherwise internationally it would become very complicated.
Right. Because DC did an edition, didn't it? There was a
in various languages. Yeah,
that's amazing.
In a wee small paperback format, and Robin Smith did one called something like Green Candles for them in the same format. It was a nice wee format. It was a very European format, like Diabolique and things like that.
Was that the thing they did Road to Perdition in as well? Was that
yes, I think you're right. Yes.
Because I seem to remember, it was a wee thing, Piranha Press or something we're doing, wasn't it? I
was trying to think of a name, that's it.
Yeah.
Well done.
It was an interesting time, but see, to go back a wee bit, that must have been a hell of a jump, when you're thinking you've got best school in Glasgow, St Aloysius, got a job there, you're out of university, probably could have been there for the next 40 years, no problem, And comics, at that point, really was still seen as a faddish thing, or really for children. It hadn't any credibility at all, 1983, 84. But what made you make that jump?
Believe it or not, during the discussion in Winter's Guilds, we picked straws.
Right.
And the one with the shortest straw had to leave and start the shop.
This sounds like Game of Thrones.
I got the shortest straw. But, see, you've got to be professional when you're running a business.
You never come and give a talk at the school, So.
But because I think between the three of us, we'd so much knowledge about comics,
right,
including European comics, American comics, British comics, that we became a hub. And as you know, Virginia Galleries was terrific. The wee cafe downstairs, the record shop, the bookshop. You could stay there all afternoon, one way or another. Archie Hindy, author, used to come in on a Sunday, and we go for a wee cup of coffee. And the fellow who illustrated Rupert the Bear, he was a regular visitor. And we'd
Alfred
Alfred
Desnell?
No. His name's gone out my head.
I know who you mean, the guy who was doing it in the 90s.
I know it's by my side. But all sorts of people just came to Virginia Galleries because it was a nice day out, Do
you know what I love about it is it's actually gone now, which is such a shame. They tore it apart, didn't they, I think, and turned it into something else, the building itself.
Yeah, what happened was Marks and Spencer's got this company, and the company were digging down quite deeply right beside Virginia Galleries. And I'm no architect. And I thought, wouldn't that wall just collapse into the empty space? Yeah. And funnily enough, without any architectural knowledge, I was right. The wall collapsed into empty space. So Pete McGurn, who was a friend of all sorts of people, and came to our comic convention in Glasgow, he redesigned it. And it is a nice looking place, but it's not the same as Virginia Galleries was.
Yeah. I know the guys that have the cafe. There's a little cafe restaurant kind of thing inside.
Yes, it's very nice.
They used to own, Stephen and Michael, they used to own Bar 10.
Ah, yes.
Around the corner. But I mean, what it used to be was incredible. You went in and you'd antique shops. You'd walk past all these antique shops and everything, and like kind of Victorian clothes shops, like really odd stuff. And then you would go along and you'd eventually come to your place. You'd Obelisk Books, which was a bookshop, proper Gandalf kind of guy with a big beard. What was his name again? Russell?
Russell Aiken. Yeah.
Russell Aiken. Russell, then Rat Records, then your shop on the end. And then you go upstairs and it's clothes shops and everything, like kind of cool clothes shops. And then downstairs, that amazing cafe. So kind of whatever people were into as a niche hobby, which everybody kind of has something, you were kind of in the Virginia Galleries on a Saturday, weren't you? Like everybody you knew was going there for something, which was great.
And folk that didn't like crowds came on the Sunday. So, yeah. A lot of shops didn't open 7 days a week, but we did. But then there were three of us, Yeah. You can't do that all by yourself, really.
You kind of forget that Sunday trading thing, for religious reasons. You didn't used to open on a Sunday in Scotland. And then weirdly, you just accept it now, that everything's open. But yours was a bit of a hub on a Sunday because it was quite a bit quieter. You'd be able to sit and have a chat. It was good.
And also the folk that have to get their comics immediately have all been to the shop on the Saturday.
Yeah.
So the people who don't mind waiting a day, they can come on a Sunday.
But at one point, I was coming in like most days. For me, it was such a hub. And I had no money, but any money I had, I was spending in the shop. Christmas money, birthday money, all this kind of stuff. So you must have had my
Well, you weren't buying drugs unless you got comics.
But I remember one time coming in asking for, I think it was Crisis on Infinite Earths issue 7 or 8 or something, And I remember I'd been in about 3 days in a row looking for it. And Pete Root, with one of his classic Pete Root lines, says to me, "Mark, it's a monthly, not a weekly." Like, get out, But it was a place unlike most shops, it's a place, it was a bit of a destination as well as a place you went to buy something.
Yes.
To hang out in, wasn't it?
Yes. It didn't work quite so well in Parney Street. But once we moved to the slightly bigger shop in Parney Street, it was all right because there was 2 sections to it. So there was room for more people. And we managed to do signing sessions there as well with Gilbert Shelton, Dave Sim and Gerhard.
Really? What?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I'd love to. I missed that one. Yeah.
Gerhard was one of our guests at the Lakes Comics Festival last year. And I've got one of his prints up on the wall here. It was a bit of a mistake that was made. My friend that I run the Paisley Festival with, his brother's called John.
Right.
And he bought his brother, I think it might have been a birthday present, and got Gerhard to sign to John from Gerhard. And so Stephen immediately photographed it and sent it to his brother in America, the photograph. And his brother said, "I've already got that print." So I inherited it.
It's funny because I think what used to draw a lot of people up for doing book signings Saturday afternoon was there was a guaranteed great ACCA night out afterwards, wasn't there? It was like a major drinking session.
Well, we always wanted to make... I would give some of the guests a tour of Glasgow.
Yeah.
I remember walking with Alan Moore up Park Circus when he was doing V for Vendetta, and he was telling me the story of V for Vendetta.
Really? Yeah.
And how this guy gets stabbed through a letterbox, and he pointed to one of the letterboxes on the street. Yeah. And he says, "It's something like that." And the villain's from Glasgow. And I went, "All right, Alan, okay." But I used to take them to the subway, and we used to go up to Kelvin Grove and everything, yeah. And then at night, as you say, went out for a meal. I felt it was the right way to treat guests,
That was great because, sometimes you do a signing and you just show up, you say goodbye and you leave again, I mean, you really want to get a big session. And if you've travelled somewhere, it's always good to get a good night out, isn't it?
Well, also, if people have come to see you, and that includes other professionals, it's nice to hang out with them after the session and not go away after 2 hours,
For them too, But I remember one time there was a big night out in, what used to be called the Copthorne Hotel. And there was about 40 of us all in the bar in there. And Vin, for people who don't know, Frank Whiteley's real name is Vin, so we'll probably drop his name all the time as Vin. But Vin and I were standing having a drink at the bar, and we were about 22 maybe or something. And I remember you were drunk, and you put your arms around the two of us, and you said, "Alcohol is the great lubricator of business." And you said...
I remember that
you
at all.
Totally right? And you said, "Never trust a man who doesn't drink," right? And I always remember this, right? And then about 5 minutes later, I went into the toilet for a pee, and you were lying unconscious in the toilet.
Yes. Unfortunately, Alan Davis found me and drew me. Yeah. That was a bad one. But if you're going to get caricatured, might as well be with Alan Davis,
But that's a proper night out. Somebody's got to be unconscious.
Yeah. Or Igor Goldkind trying to kick the door in because the hotel was closed. I can't remember if he got arrested or not, but yeah.
Igor was a good character, wasn't he? There was a lot of...
he was a character, all right, yeah.
But what amazed me, though, was I think the heat that you brought to Glasgow, to Scotland, really, meant that it was a big step for American publishers to even think about coming to Britain when they started coming to London mid-80s. But then the fact we got them to Glasgow is insane, you know. So like the bosses of DC and Marvel were suddenly in a, you know, small part of Western Europe called Glasgow, you know. Like, how did you convince them to come up there? What happened?
Well, I think it all started with the convention you were at in the Central Hotel. Because we felt we needed an American guest. So we started at the bottom and thought, Will Eisner, he'll do.
Right.
But I'd been corresponding with Will for a number of years.
Yeah.
And I'd met him a couple of times. And I said, do you fancy coming over to Glasgow? He said, very much so. But I've got to bring the wife, but I'll pay for her. Mm-hmm. But you've got to pay for me. And I said, well, that seems like a good deal. We've got a travel agent who books us trips and things like that. George Jackson, my partner in The Bogeyman, was in a band called Ossian. So they were always travelling on tour.
Right.
And they weren't long back from a successful tour in America. So it all tied in. So we'd Will over. And then we found out that Marv Wolfman was touring Europe after doing Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yeah.
So he was like in Amsterdam. So that's a doddle to fly to Glasgow.
So that's how you got Marv then? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wasn't aware at the time that Marv and Will knew each other.
Right.
And I think that came from the time that Stan Lee asked Will to take over as editor-in-chief of Marvel. But Will didn't fancy that.
Hang on. You told me this the other day in the pub, so you need to elaborate on this. Not to interrupt your story, but we'll come back to this, right?
No, well, Stan wanted to go to Hollywood, basically.
Yeah.
To cut a long story short.
1970, 72 is this? Or?
Something like that, yeah. And he thought, who's run his own company and been a publisher and knows these things? My old pal and schoolmate, Will Eisner.
Because they went to Clinton DeWitt High, didn't they? Both.
That's right. As did Bob Kane,
Calvin Klein, Bob Lancaster.
Oh, lots of people.
Crazy.
Yeah, an amazing school. Amazing school. Worth looking up on the internet, actually, just to get a list of these names. I think Neil Simon went there. I mean, it's unbelievable.
I'm send the kids there. That sounds pretty damn good, doesn't it?
Well, I think everybody should definitely make connections. So it was handy that Marv and Will knew each other back because of this period. But Will didn't take over because he didn't fancy having to deal with, it might have been Cadence Industries owned Marvel at the time.
Right.
And of course, so he wasn't in complete control like he was in Eisner and Iger days or the Spirit days. He would have been a cog in a big, huge wheel, and he just didn't fancy that. But I think that was a period that everybody became an editor. Len Wein, Marv Wolfman, everybody.
All age 25, you know.
And I think that was partly because they couldn't decide exactly how to run the company.
Right.
But then Stan went to California and with great patience started what's now Marvel Studios and everything. And, you know, you got to give the guys due. Brilliant.
I mean, when you think he first had that idea probably mid-60s when he was out there selling the animation.
He did.
And then to keep it going for another decade when nothing was happening early 70s, to keep it going right to the late 70s for the Spider-Man TV show, Hulk TV show, and then nothing again. You know, there's a few cartoons in the 80s, 90s X-Men cartoon. And you're talking decades. I mean, it's a lifetime before he really got it going, but my God, it was worth the wait, wasn't it? Yeah.
I remember when Stan met me in Glasgow. Is that a name drop?
Hang on, when was Stan in Glasgow? What was it?
He was promoting Captain Britain.
Oh, of course. Yeah, yes, 1977, yeah.
Very start of Captain Britain.
Yeah.
And he said to me, see, we can do in comics, John, what they can't do in movies. So we can have the Silver Surfer. But I'd like to do a Silver Surfer movie. He says, actually, I'd like to be Disney. So ironically, he achieved it all.
Disney became him.
Yeah. Disney became him, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Did I ever tell you I met Bob Iger and I told him, you know, who's running Disney again. This is back when he was first running Disney. And I dropped the name of Will Eisner and, you know, his uncle, Iger, who was Will Eisner's business partner.
Jerry Iger.
And he was blown away that I knew this, like, because it's kind of a niche fact, you know. But people kind of forget this, you know, that Will Eisner's business partner was Bob Iger's uncle. They lived 2 blocks away from each other.
That's correct. Yeah. So the small world was much smaller than we even thought it was. Yeah.
And that's a bunch of poor kids in Brooklyn. I mean, this isn't guys coming out of Harvard or anything like that. You know, it's working class guys. You know,
exactly. But creating modern myths that just now almost everybody in the world knows about them.
So you were saying that's how you lured people in then? You know, just Will Eisner then brings in Marv Wolfman and so on, like.
Well, because the two of them were coming in, I looked at the queue of people coming up to come in, and there was Paul Neary. There was a whole crew from 2000 AD. That's the day I met John Wagner. I didn't know he was coming.
Yeah. And
they all came because they wanted to get together, but they wanted to meet Will Eisner.
That's a genius move. I like that.
Kevin O'Neill was funny on the Sunday. I think I told you this the other day. He says to me, "Some pal you are." And I said, "What did I do, Kevin? I thought you were having a good time." You never introduced me to Will Eisner. So I got him by the arm and I took him into the wee bar that Anne and Will were sitting in. And I said, "Well, I'd like to introduce you to a great friend of mine, Kevin O'Neill." And Kevin put his hand out and went. And Kevin works for 2000 AD, you know, the comic Judge Dredd's in. And Kevin also draws a strip called Nemesis that is one of my favourites in the comic. Never said a word yet. Starstruck in the extreme.
Hello there, do you love big expensive hardcovers? So do I. Dark Horse do these beautiful library editions, and we've got a whole ton of them coming up. The first one out is October for a collection oversized of Wanted and Big Game. Coming in December, you have The Ambassadors with the greatest living comic book artists. I'm talking Frank Whiteley, Olivier Coipel, Matteo Scalera, just all your favourites. You've got to check this out. And in January, the big one, The Magic Order, collecting Volumes 1 and Volumes 2 of the original series. Art by Olivier Coipel and Stuart Immonen. Story by me. You're going to love it.
Did I ever tell you, I was 15 when that convention was on, and I actually found the wee badge from it. Did I ever tell you I actually spent the night walking the streets after that convention? Did I tell you this?
Did you not go to the film show?
Well, I said to my dad, my dad said, you don't have the cash to stay in a hotel for the night, you know? And I was like, Dad, don't worry about it. There's an overnight film show. And, you can just sit and watch videos all night. It's going to be amazing. Sci-fi films are on all night. My dad was like, all right, okay. And I remember... I think it must have been about 11:30 or something like that. The guy who ran the hotel came in and says, "Right, boys, that's the film time over," and switched everything off, and everybody went to the bar. And because I was only 15, I never get into the bar. And I remember seeing you guys. I remember seeing Alan Grant and everybody all standing with pints. And I was trying to get in, but the guys was like, "Take a hike," you know. So I get thrown out. And I remember not having the money for a hotel, so I literally just walked the streets for the night, which is insanity, you know. So I walked the streets for about 8 hours until the hotel opened up again at 8 o'clock next morning. And then I come in and I was like a zombie, and I was so excited to meet Will Eisner. I went to his talk that morning. It was like 11 o'clock or something, and I fell asleep in the front row. I was so tired because I'd been awake the entire night, so I missed his talk. You know?
Oh no! If you told me, some folks stayed in my flat, you know.
I know. I think I was so surprised at getting kicked out by the hotel management, and they threw maybe 20 of us out. You know, so I was just in a crowd of teenagers that were getting kicked out, you know. But
I didn't realise
that. I remember looking and thinking, the adult world looks so exciting. All of you guys having a pint in there, it looked great. You know?
Yeah, that's a pity. Stevie Dillon was funny. He stayed with me once or twice. But there was one time, for some reason, him and Brett Ewins were in Glasgow. Uh-huh. I don't think it was at our shop. I think it must have been some meeting or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, we were up at Cafe Gandolfi for a wee snack, and then we're walking down through the Merchant City, and Brett Ewins is so impressed with the architecture. I mean, it is beautiful. And he goes, "Stevie, you didn't tell me Glasgow looked like this. This is fantastic." And Stevie's got his head down. And he says, "But Stevie, look at that building there. What was that, John?" I said, "It was the Sheriff Court, but it's now a bar complex and things like that." Stevie's like this. And I'm taking them to a wee bar called Rab Hawes.
Oh, yeah.
Because of catching a plane, so we're going to get a taxi from Rab Hawes. And Stevie eventually said, "Look, I think John will tell you when I was in Central Hotel, I went down, I was with these guys in the bar, and I went down and I said to reception, could you give me an alarm call for 8:30? I've got to catch a train. And the guy said, it's 9:30, Mr. Dillon. And then he explained to Brett, you don't have to leave Glasgow Central. He said, there's 3 bars there. There's all these shops. There's 2 newsagents. He's kind of right.
That was great. And there was such a brilliant bunch there, wasn't there? And everybody stayed the whole weekend in a really contained space. Like, were you into with those other cons they used to have just before that called Albacon and all that, those Scottish conventions?
Yeah, I was kind of, because the Comics Club, which still meets, by the way,
right.
We're in a pub called the Sparkle Horse now, which used to be the Downhill.
I love the Sparkle Horse. It's a great pub. I used to live around the corner from there. Yeah.
Oh, did you? Right, okay. It came number 7 or something in best pubs in Glasgow recently. Oh, right. And the one that came number 1 is the Aragon in Byers Road, which is owned by a couple, Julie and Shug, from Coatbridge. So they know of you, but I don't think they know you personally, but they know of you. And Julie's a big fan of some comics, but their favourite thing was The Walking Dead. Right. So when I brought her a personally signed portrait of a zombie, not something I'd put on the wall, but by Charlie Adlard. We did it for Julie. She was utterly chuffed. So she came number 1. Sparkle Horse came something like number 7. Yeah. And number 12 was the Bon Accord at Charing Cross. Bon Accord is a beautiful pub.
I love the Bon Accords. My top pubs, for anyone listening who comes to Glasgow, I would say my top pub's the Doublet, which I used to drink 2 nights a week, probably, you know. The Doublet's a great pub. I love the Athol near Queen Street Station.
Yes.
And I must have been such a good customer that I was back in there a couple of months back. And the woman said, I haven't seen you for at least a year. She said, you're not paying for any drinks. And I was like, I must have spent a lot of money here before. You know? So and she just gave me free drinks all night, which was amazing. You know?
Were we not there with Dave Gibbons? I think we were.
We went there. And I think Goran Parlov as well. And Frank Whiteley, of course, as well. You know?
That's right. Goran's sitting talking away to me, and then suddenly he realises he's supposed to be at a session at the convention, and he's missed it.
Do we pull a good prank on Goran that day? It was funny. Frank Whiteley and I had sneaked up and paid the bill for breakfast when we were all out for breakfast. Don't know if you remember this. There's a photo of it. And then we came back and Goran said, so how are we going to split the bill? And we said, listen, this place is pretty big. We could actually sneak out of here. They'll never know. And Goran was horrified. And Vin and I went down low and went under the tables and we sneaked out. And he did the same and followed us and ran after us. And we didn't tell him for about 10 minutes.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't know that. Very good.
So see, John, like you know, we're talking about that sort of period of like the 80s being the most exciting time in comics. And people kind of sometimes get nostalgic because it's the past and things. But when you look at it, I mean, it really was an insanely brilliant creative period, isn't it? Like, there's a website called Time Machine and Mike's Amazing World of Comics or something. There's these things where you can look at what's published in a given month and a given year, right? And it's a very good comparison to stop you thinking it's just nostalgia. You know, you look at 1958 January, you know, you look at 1998 February, and nothing kind of compares to what was going on mid-80s, you know, where you had powerhouses all working at the same time. It was such a golden period to start a shop, I'd imagine. You know?
And look at all those books that are still in print all these years later. Yeah. Watchmen, V for Vendetta, Arkham Asylum, everything. They're all still in print.
Yeah. It was a great
amazing.
Book. Probably from about 1981 to about 1990 or something. It was the beginning of Vertigo. You know, was amazing. That those first couple of years,
fabulous,
phenomenal. You know, from probably the DC explosion kind of period. You know, and Jim Shooter coming into Marvel, Claremont and Byrne on X-Men. Like, I mean, it really nothing. I mean, I say this with humility because I came later. You know, but I look at that stuff and I'm blown away by it. It's incredible.
Yeah, no, it was a great. Us starting the shop in 1984, you couldn't make it up. It was just a peak period.
Yes. But that's what must have excited you to do it as well, because it's that period in the early 80s where you're so passionate about what you're reading you want other people to read it too, don't you? You're always loaning the books out to people and recommending things.
Oh, absolutely. I remember this guy was eavesdropping at me and Pete. There was a comic that Frank Plowright, who ran UCAC, brilliant conventions in London and Glasgow. Frank loved this comic called Too Much Coffee Man.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
But Pete and I didn't really like it. You know? And so Pete and I are going, don't really fancy that, blah, blah, blah. So the guy who was earwigging, he said, so you'll not be ordering any? And Pete and I looked at each other, 25, 50? He says, I thought you didn't like it. I said, oh, we're not buying it. It's for the customers. You know, you've got to know what people like, you know what you like, you know.
And for you, I mean, you're actually in the perfect kind of period to have grown up with the other amazing period in comics, which was the early to mid 60s. You know,
absolutely.
Stan, Jack, Steve, and the DC Silver Age erupting as well, you know, like with those reinventions of those Golden Age characters. So, I mean, there's a lot of retailers who sort of are around about your age, you know, and I think that's no accident because they grew up with amazing stuff that they loved. And then when they became adults, it seemed a very viable business because everybody's into this amazing period, you know.
I was born in Govan, and then we lived in Pollokshaws Road. But my dad, who'd worked in the fruit market, and previous to that in Pickford's, saw a job in IBM in Greenock, just starting up, for a transport manager. So that was totally qualified. So he got the job, and we moved down to Gourock. And Gourock at the time was amazing. It had a cinema, it had a big entertainment place, it had a theatre. It was just a fantastic place. But what it really had was the American base in Dunoon and all these Americans.
Right.
And at least 6 newsagents sold American comics.
Yeah.
Everything from Stan and Jack's early days, all the DC comics. First DC comic I saw when we first moved to Gourock was Mystery in Space with Adam Strange.
The classic
in the
one.
Warren magazines. Right. Everything. I didn't have to leave Gourock to buy all those things.
That's amazing. And what year was that then? You picked up your first book?
I think Fantastic Four 16 was the first one I got. And I can't remember the issue of Spider-Man, but I know he fell into the river and his costume shrank, which is something I'd never seen happen in a comic in my puff.
And like, so what age were you then when you were picking this up?
Pretty young, yeah.
Because you'd be a
10.
precocious reader probably, you know, you'd be picking stuff up early, you know.
All my pals at primary school were readers like me.
Yeah.
And we read Chester Himes, the black American detective novelist and things like that.
Yeah.
Things, probably if the adults knew who were reading, they'd have taken them off us, you know. But we just loved it. And Charlie Boyle is a great jazz guitarist. He got me really involved in jazz. We were able to collect jazz records. And we wrote our own wee plays and did our own wee comics and everything. It was just, it's a wee bit like Dick Quick Clinton. If your peers are into the same thing you're into, everything gets better.
Yes, that's nice. And it's kind of like, that was the Pokemon cards of the 60s, wasn't it? Like Marvel Comics.
Yeah. Well, I was ill one time when my mother bought me some random comics. There was that terrible Captain Marvel that split. I don't know if you remember that comic. It's really awful. But see if you're having a downer about your own writing, you should get a copy of that because you cannot possibly be as bad.
I'll try my best.
But amongst that, she had a couple of Marvel comics. I'd never heard of Marvel comics. And I very quickly got addicted to Daredevil, who's remained one of my favourite characters. And as I was saying to you the other day, I'm rewatching the Daredevil series on Disney Plus because I think it's the best Marvel TV show ever.
Season 2 is a bit iffy, but season 1 and 3 are amazing, aren't they? Yeah.
Season 2 is a bit iffy, and there's a bit of a plot lapse in the middle, a bit of Elektra. I went, wait a minute, what's that bit? But season 3 picks up again.
Yeah. I remember episode 1 of season 2, I was so buzzed up because I love season 1 so much. And there's a guy giving a speech walking around a table that goes on for about 20 minutes or something. That was like, you know, that Hobbit film with 2 Hobbit songs in, in one scene.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, right, I'm out. I'm not liking this. But season 3 brought me back. I was loving
Season 3 is better, yeah. Season 2, I don't know what went wrong with the plotting or something like that, but I persevered, you know. But season 3, we're back on. I think Foggy Nelson the actor's just great. He's just exactly what you would want Foggy Nelson to be.
That casting with the 3 of them, you know, the chemistry between the 3 of them is just unbelievable, isn't it? It's great. Great. And the Kingpin, I mean, one of the great castings of all time, isn't it? You know,
he's fantastic. He wouldn't be out of place in The Sopranos. He's absolutely brilliant.
Well, up until about 7 years ago, Marvel couldn't go wrong with casting, couldn't they? I mean, they were not spending any money as well. I mean, this was all relatively unknown actors. You know, they weren't doing the big $20 million paydays for their first seasons or for their first movies, but they nailed it every time, didn't they? You know, like Chris Hemsworth as Thor. You know, like Downey Jr. as Iron Man. You know, I mean, I was in those early meetings when they didn't want Downey Jr. It was Kevin Feige, to his credit, and Jon Favreau, I think, were pushing for it. But yes, it's weird to think how great they never missed with it. Paul Rudd, I think, is great as well. I love Paul Rudd.
Ant-Man was the first thing that Stan Lee took to Hollywood.
Really?
He said, "This will be a great movie," and everybody laughed. But if you look at the amount of money it earned when they actually released it, I'm reminded of Bob Monkhouse's joke. When I was young, I said I wanted to be a comedian. They all laughed. They're not laughing now. Stan got his way in the end, you know.
My favourite Bob Monkhouse joke is he says, "I want to die in my sleep, peacefully like my dad, and not screaming like all his passengers." Have you ever read Bob Monkhouse's autobiography, by the way?
Oh, I've read one, yeah. It's quite moving at times, of course.
I mean, I was reading it on holiday a few years ago, right? And people were looking at me like, "Why are you reading that?" You know, it's like the Necronomicon or something. It's like the most evil book I've ever read. Like the story where he loses his virginity to one of his aunts and things like that. I mean, it's like really dark. You know, it's not what you're expecting from Bob Monkhouse's autobiography. You know,
I've got it beside me somewhere. Actually, I have. It's in the box under there.
That was worth it. It's up there. I might
reread it. I might need to reread that.
But so, you know, as a kid then, you know, you'd the golden age really, you know, of comics. Of course, you'd be inspired to do this, you know, but you went into teaching. Like, did comics just not feel like it was possible living in Scotland and everything? You know, did you think teaching was a more realistic career at that time?
No, I don't think much thinking was involved. After university, I was offered to do a PhD, but I didn't like any of the subjects they were giving me. Right. I didn't think they could engage me for 3 years, you know. Yeah. And you need to be engaged to do a decent book. You know? Yeah. I'm still waiting for my honorary degree for all the work I've done. But I just drifted into teacher training college. Yeah. And then when I was still wondering what to do, I got a phone call from the headmaster of St Aloysius. Somebody had left all of a sudden. Could I join them? And I said, I haven't finished Jordan Hill yet. Oh, that doesn't matter. We're an independent school. So I had to do some exams and things or submit papers while I was actually already working as a teacher. So it happened by happenstance, really. But do you remember, you and I were guests at UCAC, Frank Plowright's guests down in London. And we did, I think, the first panel in the morning, should be about 10. I think we both had lager, so maybe it was 11. And at the end of the talk, this guy starts coming towards us, and I said to you, that looks like Leo Baxendale. And for Americans, he created some of the greatest comic characters in British history. And he comes up and he goes, hello, John. And I said, Mr. Baxendale, I know who you are, but how do you know who I am? He said, well, your boss told me. I said, my boss? And I was struggling to think who my boss was. And I went, I work at St Al's. It's Tony Richmond, the Jesuit. He said, yes, Tony and I were at school together. He told me you were coming down. Well, he never told me. That's how I met Leo Baxendale.
That's crazy. That's crazy. I mean, he's probably Dudley D. Watkins and he are probably the two greatest British cartoonists of all time, though, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fabulous people.
So, but for me though, like, because you've always had that great thing that I don't have the patience for, which is people who don't know what they're doing. You've got time for them. You know, you're really good at like encouraging talent. And I think teaching's quite natural for you in that regard as well. You know, so we were all coming in there so raw, no idea what we were doing. You were always very wise. I remember trying to be an artist and I brought you in some of my samples and you explained to me about cross-hatching and, you know, just how to lay out a page and everything. You know, you always had time, which I always thought was really nice. Yeah.
Well, as a teacher, let's say you've got a higher class.
Yeah.
You can tell pretty much within a couple of months who's going to get an A, who's going to get a B, and who's going to get a C. And it also taught me how to be a good editor and tell kids what was wrong with their essay. I had a pupil recently, I still get pupils occasionally, and he was really despairing. He thought he couldn't possibly get higher English. And my friend Carol, it's friends of hers, and so I went up and I was looking at the boys' stuff, and I made the remark to Carol, I think maybe I've started a bit late. If I'd had this guy at the beginning of the term, it might have been better.
Yeah.
But I explained to him how to write an essay properly. I explained to him what to put in, what to put out. He knew all his stuff. That was a great thing. I knew he had it in him because he was doing a play called Men Should Weep. He knew all about it. Great Gatsby, knew all about it. Some George Orwell, knew everything. All he had to do was get that on paper. And he got a B.
Wow.
From fail to B in 2 months or something.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So
some people are natural teachers and some aren't. I think you've naturally got time for people who know less than you do. But I only like people who know more than I do. I love to learn from someone. You know? I feel
so we're not going to get you at the School of Visual Arts in New York teaching at any time.
But Scotland is funny as well, because I mean you've got a great knowledge of this, but why do you think Scotland punches above its weight in terms of comic people? Because it really does.
Well, Jim Bakey asked me that years ago, and I said, well, the weather's terrible, so you need a job you can stay in the house. And I was only half joking because it is kind of true.
Yeah.
But DC Thompson, I think, is the key. Pat Mills, John Wagner, Alan Grant, all DC Thompson.
Yeah.
All those Warlord begat Battle, because Battle was IPC's response to Warlord. Also, the culture in Scotland was the Bruins and Urbilly from the Sunday Post, which at the time was one of the world's biggest selling newspapers.
For people who don't know, Urbilly and the Bruins, as an annual, used to come out every Christmas, you know, alternate years. And I think, if I'm right, John, was there one in every house in Scotland at its peak, like 1 million copies in a country of 5.5 million people, something crazy?
Yes, I think on average you could say everybody in Scotland either read comics or knew about them. Everybody, the whole 5 million.
Which is weird, isn't it? I mean, when you think we're 0.2% the size of America, you know, there's about 6 million of us, isn't there? 5.5 million. And
5.5, yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely crazy what the numbers were. You know, 1 million copies in a country of 5.5 million people is.
I know. It's astonishing, and I don't think there's probably another country like it. France has a fabulous tradition of bande dessinée.
Yeah.
But not all that stuff comes from France. Some of it's Belgian. Hugo Pratt lived everywhere, as you'll be able to find out from my new biography when I finish it.
When is that happening, by the way? Are you going to be done next year, do you think?
I'm hoping to be done after Easter, yeah. I may contact Patricia, I've forgotten her surname, who was Hugo Pratt's colourist,
right,
and who now works for Kong SA, who are the rights owners and who distribute and publish Hugo Pratt's works. I may contact them, but I want to get the manuscript a wee bit finished. There's a new shop in Leith in Edinburgh called La Belle Aventure, run by Annabelle and Benoit, and they sell only graphic novels in English and French. Now, sometimes they sell the same graphic novel in English and French, so if you can't read French, just buy it in English. But they've solved my problem getting some obscure Hugo Pratt books because they have a French distributor. So instead of me waiting interminably or trying to get something through Amazon, they get it for me. So I've got a couple more books to get, and then I'm going to do a rewrite of the whole manuscript, and then that should be me finished.
Oh, I can't wait for that. Sounds great. And that shop, I love to hear new comic shops opening, and especially European album shop. I mean, that's my favourite thing. There's nothing I love more than a wee browse around one of them. So what's it called, the one in Leith?
La Belle Aventure.
Right.
La Belle Aventure.
Oh, amazing.
And Vin did a signing there a couple of weeks ago.
All right.
And I was a wee bit late arriving because there was more than one thing happening. And I walked in, and Annabelle took me up to a seat beside Vin, and I turned around to the audience and I said, by the way, I was interviewing this man some years ago, and after about 20 minutes, this girl in the audience put her hand up and said, who's this Vin you keep referring to? I came here to see Frank Quiley. I said, well, that's Vincent's real name. Yeah. So we cleared that up immediately. And then Vin was great, actually. Yeah,
it's a Dr. Frankenstein situation, isn't it? Where Frank Quitely became so much bigger than he ever expected him to become, didn't he, when he created that
Exactly.
name?
Well, it was just meant as a wee nom de plume for Electric Soup, and then suddenly it's known throughout the world.
Do you know why he had a pseudonym?
Was it not to protect his mum from knowing he was doing these scatological cartoons in Electric Soup?
He thought his mum would be horrified by this kind of underground comics thing. And it was for sale in every newsagent in Scotland. You know, it was really easy to get. So he didn't want his mum being embarrassed, which I thought I love. It's so Vin, isn't it?
Brilliant. And I loved his strip, The Greens, which was a parody of the Bruins.
Great. I mean, most Americans, it's weird to think he's done all these huge American books, but people will probably never see that stuff, you know.
Yeah, I know. They should reprint it, actually, because there's some pretty good stuff in there.
There's not enough of his stuff to reprint, isn't there? You could probably get a book out of that,
Yeah, and Rob McCallum as well. And I used to love a strip called The Wildebeest, and one of my customers said, "Oh, that strip's rubbish. They all die at the end of every episode." I said, "The Wildebeest. That's kind of what happens to wildebeest." Oh, I still don't get it.
So I remember one of my friends at Marvel, I was up at his house in New York, and his gran was in, and she was telling me why she hated The Simpsons. And I was like, why do you hate The Simpsons? And she said, that idiot Homer. He said, could he do one thing right? You know, she said, I would enjoy it if he did one thing right. You know, it's like you're missing the point here. So, we should probably wrap up soon, but funnily enough, I was thinking about, you know, that whole sort of retail scene, you know, from the 80s and all that. You know, did you have a sense, because it was Glasgow was its own wee thing. Did you know the other guys like outside of Glasgow? I know you knew like Jim and the guys and Kenny at Forbidden Planet and everything, but did you know the English ones and everything? Were you guys like Nick Landau and all these guys? Were you all friendly?
Yeah, I did know them. Yeah. Because of, well, partly the Westminster Comic Mart. And after the Westminster Comic Mart were Kevin O'Neill, Mick McMahon, Dave Gibbons, Alan Moore, and I would go, and Bob Napier, we would go to the Westminster Arms pub just along the road. And that's how we all got to know each other. And Nick Landau, I think he was maybe editor at 2000 AD at that point. Right. Very brief period. But I got to know him. I got to know Mike Lake. I saw Mike recently. Mike came up to the Lake District to talk to us about various projects. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I knew all those people. I knew some of the dealers from Manchester and that. Yeah, and I knew quite a lot of the comics folk. Yep.
Because you know the way every artist and every writer all knows each other in the scene. Is it like that? Is there any kind of meetups with retailers or anything like that? Did you guys ever get together with Diamond or anything? Or?
Yeah, we did actually. That's right. Yeah, we did. I'd forgotten that till you mentioned it. Yeah, there were meetups with particularly Titan, who became Diamond over here. Yeah. And yeah, that's where all the retailers got together, and we talked about the scene and what was happening and what we'd like to see happening, what was happening with the Titan reprint albums that Nick Landau started. formats. We used to talk about all that stuff. Yeah, it was really good fun.
I'm amazed that the companies don't utilise retailers more as editors and things like that as well, because I think retailers are on the front line and they can see the boredom in people's faces or the excitement in people's faces in a way that in New York you can't, you know.
I think that's true.
I think I'm amazed that they don't poach more people from retail.
But some of us were down at the SSI when Jeanette Kahn was there and Dick Giordano. All coming to poach the British comic book people. But it was a really brilliant period. I mean, Vertigo, there was years past and I would read a Vertigo comic every month. It was just an amazing period.
Yeah, that was brilliant. I mean, it's lovely to not have enough money to buy the number of books you want to read, you know. And it's like a child thing, isn't it? Where there's just so many books out there that you want to read. And that's what it felt. Every time I walked into the shop, it was like that. And then you would say things like, oh, check out this comic from before you were born, or, you know, whatever. You know, like, it was just impossible to keep up with everything. It was such an exciting time. And I think that's why there's a lot of guys my age as well, you know, like Garth Ennis and Warren Ellis and everybody all kind of coming in, because we grew up on such a brilliant period too, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. It's just timing and the companions that you hang around with are two important things.
That's a great one to end on, because, like I say, none of us would be here. You know, like I don't know what the hell I'd be doing. I'd be like just lying drunk in a corner, you know. If it wasn't
I remember you said to somebody once, if it hadn't been for John McShane, I'd be an accountant or something like that.
Let's not get crazy. I don't think I'd have gone that low. You know? But
I thought, poor Mark, I've rescued him.
But it really was. It was such a brilliant period, you know. So thanks very much. Thanks for always having the patience for me and my wee gang. You know, like pals of mine who weren't even into comics used to come in as well. You know, like and just hang around because it was a kind of fun hub, wasn't it? You know,
all these bands used to come in. Texas and Wet Wet Wet, Deacon Blue. They all used to come and go because they knew someone who collected comics, or it was getting really trendy at the time, and it was all these great Scottish bands. So it all connected up.
And guys who had been reading comics and had been quiet about it were suddenly able to say they were reading comics. Like, I met Julian Cope one time, you know, from The Teardrop Explodes. And he said to me he'd been in ACCA. He says, because I told him I did comics, he went, oh, do you know ACCA Books and Comics? And I was like, yeah, you know. And he'd been in, you know, probably under the radar, just buying some books, you know.
I think The Teardrop Explodes is from a Don McGregor comic, Daredevil or something.
I might out nerd you here, but I have a feeling it's an Avengers or a Hulk. Maybe an Avengers or a Hulk. And I think it might be Harlan Ellison. I think it might be Harlan.
Oh, you know, it might be.
It was one of those very flowery early 70s, you know, those really faux Shakespearean Marvel comics, wasn't it? You know,
yes.
It was really sort of pretentious, but amazing, you know.
Yep, absolutely. Brilliant.
Because it was a close-up of a caption, wasn't it? The teardrop explodes, and I think that's what
a long time since I've looked it up, but yeah.
But listen, John, thanks again. And before I go, do you remember what folder you had in AKA? Do you remember what your... Because mine was number 17. Like, that your order was kept in. What was yours? Were you number 1?
I think I was number 1, yeah. You were quite high up, number 17.
I was there first day it opened. I was in there that Saturday, so
that's amazing.
The standing order. You just walk in. Before we knew each other's names, I'd be like, number 17, please. You know, like,
we had about 400 eventually,
right? And they got pretty fat, didn't they? You know, like
money, it was just.
I remember it was like a drug addict. I was like hoping to try and pay off my stash that I had in number 17. You know?
At least you paid it off. Some people didn't.
Well, listen, thanks again, John, and I'll see you at Christmas when we're up. You know, we're going to get a wee curry going with Vin, Frank Whiteley. We'll get, and probably a couple of the other lads as well. You know,
excellent. That'd be great.
Smashing. Thanks again, John. I'll see you soon.
No, thank you for inviting me, Mark. It's great to be in this great company. All the best.
See you later, John.
See you later.